Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday we have Zotrix Starglider, a wave-based twin-stick shooter. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From publisher Ocean Media, Zotrix Starglider released for the Nintendo Switch in early January 2021, though at the time of this recording it's not available on all eShops, specifically the North American one, so this particular copy I picked up off of the Japanese eShop. It is available on some other eShops worldwide, keep that in mind. The price point does seem to be around the same. So, it's a twin-stick shooter that, at best, I can describe as having a mediocre taste. It's not great, it's not bad, it's just kind of run-of-the-mill. Rather than tell you that, though, let's just dive into the game itself, and you can kind of judge for yourself. So, here at the main menu, there are two modes you can play the game in, single-player and two-player co-op. The two-player co-op is definitely worth showing, so I will be showing that one off as it does change up some of the gameplay. But starting in single-player, so initially you'll only have one ship available and you'll just jump right in there. It's this ship here, the Furies. But as you play through the game, if you get to stage 5, once you die, you will unlock one of the other ships, the Soul and the Kronos are the two that I've unlocked at this point. There's, I believe, 7 ships total, so it's worth playing through the game multiple times to unlock additional ships. That's one of the aspects I do really like about the game. So we'll take the Kronos, as I haven't actually played much with this one. So gameplay-wise, it's pretty basic. You've got movement with your left stick, and you aim with your right stick. As far as the switch controls, you fire with your right trigger, and there's also one additional move we have, the Space Dive. So the Space Dive is basically an invulnerability move where you'll become briefly invulnerable to enemy shots by kind of like moving underneath the plane where the enemies and the enemy shots are. So one thing to note about our shots do cancel out the enemy shots, but as the game progresses, the enemies do become, well, they'll swarm you and basically make it difficult to dodge all the enemies and all their shots. Though one thing I've noted is you'll generally lose more lives to hitting enemies that are charging through you rather than hitting enemy shots. So each ship does have an overheat, and depending on which ship you take, they will overheat faster or slower based on like its overall power level. So the more powerful the ship, the faster your shot will overheat. But it's very easy to reset that. You just need to release the trigger and then you can go back to firing without much consequence. So when it's like that, it's almost it's worth questioning why bother including an overheat mechanism at all. So we have picked up some power-ups at this point, and they start off with a certain progression. You have your base laser to begin, then you'll pick up a double laser power-up, then the game gives you a triple laser power-up, and lastly it gives you power lasers, which increases your laser's damage by 50%. Although keep in mind, each ship will have a different amount of power, so depending on which ship you take, it'll still vary as to how much power that ultimately amounts. So the enemies spawn in these wave-based patterns, and there are part of a stage. So each stage consists of 3 waves, and there are a total of 10 stages in the game, for a total of 30 waves. So the first several stages are relatively straightforward and honestly kind of dull. You're fighting the same kind of monotonous pattern of ships, and some of the wave patterns do get more interesting, and the enemies themselves get a bit more difficult to both dodge and take out, as they'll get more HP or fire more shots at you, but ultimately it's just the same thing. Starting in stage 6, you do encounter bosses, but the bosses themselves aren't terribly difficult, at least not the ones that I've fought to this point. So, and really, that's kind of about it. The gameplay definitely comes across as just samey and monotonous. As far as like the movement, there is some momentum that you get from moving around. So you move in a direction, you'll drift for a little bit, and your shots actually do cause your ship to drift. So if I let go of the left stick, you can see I'm still slightly drifting to the right while firing to the right. And sometimes there's also some weird oddities, I'm assuming, that have to do with the drift, where it seems like you're kind of stuck in place for a moment. It's just a little bit bizarre how sometimes the movement mechanics ultimately handle. So that's basically your single player gameplay. It will progress through this as you progress through the waves. So let's show off the multiplayer so you can kind of get an idea of the whole package that Zotrix Starglider presents. So here we are back at the main menu. Selecting 2-player co-op will take you into the co-op mode, but before I get there, there's one thing I really have to note. So this mode is really wanting you to use 2 Joy-Cons. In fact, that's the only way it really works. If you were to have another controller plugged in and hand somebody the pair of Joy-Cons, it's still not going to work properly. It'll basically be like the player with the Joy-Cons is controlling both ships. It's really bizarre, and this whole scheme, it's interesting, but I wish there were more options for controls in this mode. So selecting this mode, if you have ships unlocked, you're given the ability to select the different ships for the different players. So since I was showing off the Kronos earlier, I'll take the Furies, so you can see that ship in action, and for player 2 we'll select the Soul. Keep in mind, still at this point, it's assuming that one player is holding both Joy-Cons in the normal orientation. It's, once again, super bizarre. Once you get into co-op mode, it goes over the controls, and this is interesting. So you've got the ability to move, you have the space dive, but nowhere does it tell you how to fire, and that's because the firing is automatic. It's a really bizarre choice. So let's see how that works in action. So you can move your ship around, but as far as the firing is concerned, you'll note that each ship has this halo or circle surrounding them, and that is how the game knows to select your target. It will pick the closest target to you within that circle. Though that's not necessarily all bad. Actually, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes it even easier than playing through the game itself. There are parts where single player gets difficult, but in 2-player mode, with things being auto-select for your, or rather auto-fire for your targeting, the game can get ridiculously easy. And one of the reasons it gets ridiculously easy is when you have the 2 ships next to each other, you're using one of the power-ups that you don't actually see till later in the game, the Bullet Vortex. So the Bullet Vortex, when you collect it in a single player game, only lasts for 1,000 shots. In 2-player mode, you get the Bullet Vortex just as long as the 2 ships are within really close proximity of each other, making this mode very powerful. You get all those shots, which do a wonderful job of clearing out enemy bullets as well as the enemies themselves, thus defeating the enemies very rapidly and racking up points very quickly. The power-ups do come in about the same time frame for a 2-player game as they do in a 1-player game, but you do have to keep in mind that power-ups aren't shared, so if one player has all the power-ups, they shouldn't hog the power-ups from the other player. And this includes the HP, as this was something I actually forgot to talk about. So instead of, you have a kind of like a shield meter that's displayed there with your lives, and the more hits you take, the closer to death you'll become. But at certain points, the game will throw you HP refills, which will increase your health by roughly 50%. Actually, not roughly, by 50%. In addition to that, it is also possible to gain 1-ups. The values depend on single player or multiplayer. So if you're playing co-op, every 500 enemies you defeat, you'll gain a 1-up. But if you're playing single player, it's 1,000 enemies defeated to gain a 1-up. And that is basically Zotrix Starglider served up for your enjoyment. At the end of the day, this really is just kind of like a mediocre, somewhat dull twin stick that has a really weird two-player mode. The choice to only allow the using the Joy-Cons for two-player and to take away your ability to aim is just weird. I would have liked the ability to play a more advanced co-op mode where each player controlled their own shots, and thus making the game still easier, but like more difficult than what this is. Although I guess if they still gave you the ability for the bullet vortex, it wouldn't really much matter, as that's what really makes this mode that much easier than single player. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, just the co-op mode and the lack of well, additional co-op modes is truly disappointing. And then the big one, the game is just too dull and monotonous of twin stick. There's just not enough variety here. On the plus flavors, I do like unlocking additional ships, even if their overall function doesn't seem to change that much. It just basically gives you faster movement and better or more powerful shots, at the cost of having a little bit more overheating issue. And since it's auto-fire, overheating is non-existent in the two-player mode, just something to point out. So, yeah, this is definitely a twin-stick shoot-'em-up that I think you're safe to take a pass on. Alright, that should just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.